Good morning. My name is Greg Davis. I'm with CBS ArcSafe, and I would like to welcome everybody to our presentation on some of the products we have for remote switching for Square D and their various breakers and items that they make for switchgear. If you can contact us, it can be through 1-877-472-3389 or info@cbsarcsafe.com. Now, the first thing we're going to start with today is our RSA 147, and this is for the HVL switch. One of the humorous things I have to tell you is that whenever we bring a new person online, whether it's one of the women in the shop or a new guy in sales or anything else, we have to let them experience what you as operators have to go through. You know, you come out here and you say, okay, do this one-handed, and they're like, oh, you can't do it. And you have to push and push and push and push and push to close this by hand. And you can see if somebody's got to put forth this much effort, that until remote switching came along, there was no way they were going to get back from being able to operate this type of switch. Now, some things to note about the Square D family of HVL switches is they make inverted and top feed switches. They make also load break switches for different types of things. So while you may have a switch handle that looks like this, if it doesn't say HVL down on the data plate, then it's a slight variation of that, and we can help you identify that if you send us the pictures, so that we can do that and then help you get the correct RSA in this family of products. Okay, okay, there we go. So just to show you how this thing looks, okay, it's a fairly tall remote switch actuator. This tab right here is going to go into this crease at the door, okay? And that's going to be our locator. We're going to put this up here, and then we have a handle attachment that's going to slide over and lock in place with a pin. And then it's going to be able to operate the switch with the RSO1. Some other things to note about the switch is this will work with all the Kurt key configurations that are on the door. This switch can be mounted here on the left side or the right side. They actually can mount this in one of two places here in this assembly for various needs and applications. So again, send us your pictures and we'll help you figure out which version you have and which remote switch actuator you need. This has got our standard 4-pin Amphenol connector. It does have a slot in it so that you have a hard time screwing up connecting this. As we say, we will try and make things idiot resistant. All right. The standard RSO1, while I'm doing this from right here, remember, I can get this up to 30 feet to about 10 meters away from there. So you want to get this outside of the arc flash hazard boundary before we turn it on and actuate it. So that's what we would normally tell you, the customer, to do. Look at your sticker on the switchgear, step out of the boundary and operate it there. If you have high boundaries, we also make these with radio remotes so that you can operate them up to 100 meters away. So we'll turn our power switch on. AR is off, and now we're going to go hold down the trip button. And now the close button. You would turn this off then and remove the RSO and the RSA from the equipment and proceed on your merry way. The next product we have deals with the Master Pack series. Now, some of the things to explain about the Master Pack series is the original breaker was made by Merlin Geron, and it was an MP series. And an MP series has a different handle than the NW series. The NW series is what was made for a very long time and is still made, and they have a new version out, the Easy Pack MTZ series. And so you need to let us know what version of a Master Pack you have, MP, NW, or MT, and what size breaker it is for us to be able to properly help you out, because things do change just a little bit. Now, the first one we're going to look at is in our classic RSA lineup, and that's the RSA 120. This product will charge, close, and trip the circuit breaker. On this side, we see the solenoids for closing and tripping, and we also see the handle. The handle is attached with an IGUS connector, and we will remove the handle and put it on the circuit breaker first before we place the rest of the RSA on there. Once we place the RSA on there, and you can see that this is going to locate around our plastic escutcheon here to make it easy for setting up. Once we've done that, we'll connect the IGUS connector, and then we'll connect the RSO to the RSO 3D, the RSA rather, to the RSO 3D. Now, you'll see two connections. This first one is the 4-pin, and the second one, which is going to operate the motor, is the 3-pin. So again, we try to make it so nobody should have a problem knowing which wire connects to which thing, and they can't cross-connect the RSO and the RSA. You'll return this to the up position right there. Our IGUS connector is now connected. The RSO has settings on it. 7 cycles, so it's going to pull the arm down 7 times, 4.2, 4.2, and we'll just check that as we turn this on and work to get it connected. And again, while this one doesn't have radio remote, if you have extreme arc flash hazard boundaries, we can do an RSO 3D with radio remote and get you out to 150 or 100 meters. So let's see. We've got 7 cycles, and I'll tilt the box here and just let you see. 7, 4.2, 4.2. All right, at this point, we're ready to operate the circuit breaker. We move the box out of the arc flash hazard boundary, and then we push our charge close button once, and you're going to see it start to count. Our spring is now in the charged position, so now we can close. Let me check my alignment. I'm off just a hair to the right. That's my. Yep. That was my fault. Okay. Close. And trip the circuit breaker. Besides the RSA 120, we also have the NW20, the RSK NW20. And that's from our Martech lineup, and is for simply closing and tripping the circuit breaker. So if all you need to do is close and trip the circuit breaker, and you're going to manually operate the charging arm yourself, this is an ideal setup for that. It locates very easily onto the circuit breaker, so I'm going to finish taking the RSA 120 handle off. I've got to manually charge it though first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now we've got the breaker charged. And you can see this is going to line up. This goes into the charging handle down here for an easy lineup configuration. And then the two buttons here will line up with our close and trip buttons. You'll press the enable button after you turn the power button on. There we go. So we've got our green light on. And now we're going to close the breaker. And now we can trip the breaker. And that's how easy this is to set up and operate. The system is made with, and it comes with a standard 30-foot, or we can have it with a 50-foot cable. Does this one have the wireless, or the?
This one does not.
Not yet. Okay, so we haven't gotten Milwaukee batteries on this one yet, but we may soon. So that's how we can handle the Master Pack series, just to let you know. Now, before we get on to the next RSA, one of the things you're going to notice about this Square D panel is these breakers come in various sizes, and they come at various depths. So you have to let us know how deep or flush mounted a product is, because you may have 2 to possibly 3 different RSAs depending upon how these circuit breakers are mounted to handle one type of circuit breaker. So depth is important because we're going to use these faces like on this and here to locate the side here in terms of where it's recessed to help resist movement. So all this plays into the geometry of making a remote switch actuator to handle a certain type of circuit breaker and how it's mounted. This one we're going to be using on the Power Pack, and the small one up here, it comes with a couple different names in terms of, like, you can have an H frame and a K frame and others that are the same size. But this one's the RSA 164E. Let me turn it over here so you can see. And it's for the Square D Power Pack J frame, 150 to 200 or 20, yeah, to 250 amp circuit breaker. Okay, and the way that this is going to mount is we're going to put it up here, and it's going to actually locate on the raised portion of the circuit breaker. There we go. breaker's in the trip position, so we're going to close. And now we're going to trip. And that's all it takes to operate that type of motor, or rather molded case circuit breaker. Now next comes one of the biggest switches you're ever going to see somebody operate. These come in bottom and top feed type things. Just to let you know, it takes about 200 plus foot-pounds to be able to charge this spring. So we've got a cheater bar on here, and other people do the same thing, where they will use this to be able to charge this spring. Now the way that this mounts is this. We've got a couple small magnets right here, our actuators right here, and this is going over the lockout tagout portion right there. This uses the Milwaukee battery on it so that you can get a good distance away from it. What you'll do is once you've got your springs charged, you'll come in and place this on here. It's going to locate on the face just like this. Then we'll take our press and hold and enable, and we're wake it up first down here, so we got to wake this up. Then we can press this, and then we're going to close the breaker. Now, once you're done with that, you go ahead and remove this. You turn it off, put it to sleep, put it back in the box. When it comes time to come back and trip the breaker, you're going to wake it back up. You're going to place it back on. Hold down your enable and trip the breaker. Turn it off and put it back to sleep. And that's how easy it is to operate that big bolt lock switch. Now, the next circuit breaker we're going to move on to is the Westinghouse DS. Now you say, Greg, you're talking about Square D products today. For a while, before Square D got the Master Pack breaker, they made the DS breaker under license from Westinghouse. So you're going to see these things with just a plain gray face that say Westinghouse. You're going to see them with a red face that says Cutler Hammer. You're going to see them with a yellow face that says Square D. And you're going to see them with an Eaton face, which is blue. They're still a DS breaker. Now, just to describe also a couple variations. A DS breaker will always have a similar face, but if it was made in early 1972, it may have two handles over here on the side. So we have a different variation to deal with there. These breakers were licensed to be made by Mitsubishi. And so we found these in the Middle East and in a couple other places where you open the cubicle door and you're like, that's a DS breaker, but it says Mitsubishi on it. And so they'll have the handles on the side instead of here, down here at the bottom, okay? And there's one more version that we've seen down in South America, which actually has a place for secondary connectors over here. So we need to know which series and style of breaker you have to be able to provide the right remote switching system for it, especially if we're doing the charging part of the operation. You're going to notice that this is open. Normally there's a small dust cover right here, but if we're using our RSA 12A, we remove that little silver dust cover because we use this as a locator hole for the RSA 12A. One other thing to note is this is the manually operated version of the breaker. The manual operated version has the longer handle like this. If this was an electrically operated version, the handle would be about only 2/3 as long. The difference being a manually operated breaker takes 1 stroke to charge the spring. If you have an electrically operated breaker, it takes 9 strokes to charge the spring. The RSA 12A can handle both types, but you do have to make an adjustment on it. So when you're looking at this, here's the RSA 12A. I'm going to set it down right here. And I'm going to try and turn it just a little bit, but it'll say, do you have an electric breaker or do you have a manual breaker? And so you're looking in here to make sure that you've got it set right, because there's micro switches inside of here which actuate and they change the distance of the stroke travel for the charging arm based upon whether you have a manually operated breaker or an electrically operated breaker. So you want to make sure that you know the difference between the two styles. This will operate anything from a little 206 frame all the way up to the 840 4,000 amp frame. So it's made for all of the families of the breakers, especially with those with just the locator here at the bottom and the handle right there. So that's one of the important things to notice about the 12A. Okay? So to place this on the circuit breaker, we're going to have this go over the handle. There's a little cutout tab right inside here, and this locator hole will go into this right here. So at the same time that I was putting it on there, I also made sure that the handle for the charging mechanism was in there. This says cycles 9 for electric, cycles 1 for manual. So our RSA should be set to 1 and 7.5 and 7.5. And we can just check that real quick here. Cycle 1, 7.5, 7.5. So the RSO3 is all set up for this operation. Now, the funny part about this particular RSA is the customer that came to us and said, we have to be able to charge an electrically operated breaker to be able to operate it even when the charging motors burn out. We're like, really? And they said, yes. This circuit breaker is so critical to plant operations, you have to make this capability for us. We're like, oh. So if you've got a motor that's got worn pawls on it, that's not properly charging your breaker, and it won't charge it, and you're having to like manually crank it, and you don't have time to take that circuit breaker out of service, this is something you may want to consider as an addition to your lineup. We'd still recommend you contact one of our sister companies within circuit breaker sales to get the circuit breaker serviced. They do have loaners that they can loan out to you, and they get your other circuit breaker service. So if you're able to take that thing out of service for a short time, they can get you a loaner, get your circuit breaker refurbished, and get it back to you and put it back in normal operation, which is what would be the smartest thing to do. All right. So now we can hit the charge close button once. Now we'll hit our close and our trip, and we'll turn. The DS10 is made for just closing and tripping the circuit breaker. It's not going to charge it. It's very simple to set up and operate. You're going to look at the breaker status right here for the open and close. It's got 5 little magnets that hold it in place. It has to be mounted on the breaker for you to be able to operate it. It sits right here on the handle, so if I just put this down here on the handle, and you can see, okay, there's 2 cutouts down here at the bottom. Let me just show you that sit on the handle to help you get this on here pretty easily. So now we're going to turn on the enable. I'm going to charge it. Got my spring charged. And now I can go close. And that's it. That's how it's made to set up and operate. Square D, we've got remote switch actuators for Square D Model 3, Model 4, Model 5, and Model 6. And they come in a variety of sizes. So Square D Model 3 has 2 sizes. Square D Model 4 has 2 sizes. Square D Model 5 only has 1 size. Square D Model 6 has 2 sizes. And the difference comes from what type of circuit breaker, molded case circuit breaker, you have inside of the MCC bucket. If you have an older bucket, it has a larger handle on it, and this is going to be, you're going to have like an I-line series molded case circuit breaker. If you have a power packed breaker in there, it's going to be a smaller handle. And that's important because whether you're dealing with an RSA 33 series, we have a 33 and a 33A. If we're dealing with our Martech line, we have the SLD6 and the SLD6C. So anytime you get a refurbishment bucket, if you've got one of the older ones with large handles, and then I'll give you a new one, you might wind up needing both of the remote switching kits or remote switching actuators to be able to perform this operation. So just a heads up, the difference is that the newer ones are about 3/4 of an inch smaller in overall length, and the handle's a little bit smaller also. So you have to be able to work with the geometry of what Square D gives you to be able to make a remote switching kit for this system. It's fairly simple, easy to set up and operate. So you can see that this is what's going to go on the face of the MCC right here. It locates right around the handle. This is the reason why. This cutout is based upon this size, all right? And so if you've got a smaller one, then the cutout has to be smaller to accommodate that so it fits properly on there to be able to perform the operation like you want it to. All right, press to wake it up, press to hold it on. We're in the open position, so we're going to go to on. And then when you're done, put it to sleep. Okay, once again, info@cbsarcsafe.com or 1-877-472-3389. Do we have any questions?
Open it up for questions now.
Yeah, please don't be afraid to ask questions. Ben's got the questions, so.
Yeah, we'll give it a minute or two for
Okay.
people to chime in.
Sometimes you may have things like water doors. You may have that have to be removed, and we've designed it so that the RSA can work with that. Sometimes you may have fixed mounted breakers. And the thing is, we need to get a picture of what you have for switchgear. So what I've seen on some Merlin versions of this, when they mount this with a fixed mount, is because this part's gone, they'll actually move the bottom escutcheon up. And so we have to adjust the geometry of the RSA to match what you have in your actual facility. For sending us something like this, it's important for us to get the pictures of what you have. So if we have to modify a remote switch actuator at all in this series, it's important for you just to get us the pictures of those so we can know how we have to set everything up so the geometry is correct. We know that you may have Kirk keys on here and other things. The RSA is made to accommodate the Kirk keys. Any other questions? Or okay. So once again, info@cbsarcsafe.com or 1-877-472-3389.